All right, folks, we're going to try to make a little video here. I'm really going to do my best to not get too long-winded about it all. Tonight I am remembering one of my benefactors from when I was much younger. I sometimes have called him one of my fiddling gurus. By guru, I mean teacher. And boy, was he ever. But he didn't teach me anything about fiddling per se. He just taught me about life in general and about so many other things, just by example, just by being who he was. I'm going to try to put up a picture of old man Rice, Alfred N. Rice. Of course, that's me on the left there, my long red beard, playing one of Rice's fiddles. This is back in the fiddle room. This would have been about 1975, 1974. Rice was already in his 80s, I believe. Maybe even close to 90. Somewhere around in there. After spending some years away, both in Denver and in Arizona, I finally returned to Missouri and started going to school in Columbia, Missouri, home of Mizzou, the University of Missouri, Columbia. And being a fiddle player, I eventually found my way into a local band. And I suppose one could say the rest is history. But because I was a fiddle player, I eventually found out about old man Rice, because he had a bunch of fiddles in his house, and he was kind of like just an unassuming old man who had fiddles for sale, and he liked to sit around and talk about fiddles and everything about fiddles. And so I eventually found my way to him and became quite enamored of the fellow, if I may say so. He was a marvelous old man. But he had some kind of a neurological disorder. I believe nowadays they would call it ALS. Or perhaps what Rice had was something like Lou Gehrig's disease. I'm not sure. What I do know is that his hands would tremble all the time. All like that. So he couldn't play the fiddle very well anymore. He would try to put the fiddle under his chin, and his right hand would tremble nonstop, and the bow would just be sort of bouncing up and down on the string, making all this horrible noise, scratchy noise, and bouncing sounds. And he would do his damnedest to play these tunes. And he liked to play. He always seemed to gravitate toward playing some old romantic pieces that sounded like something from way long time ago. And you know what? More than likely they were, because I came to find out that old Rice used to play in the pit orchestra somewhere, possibly even in Columbia, or somewhere thereabouts around central Missouri. He used to play in the pit orchestra for the silent movies back in the teens and 20s. if you can believe that. It's true. And he also used to be a good guitar player, as I came to find out from some other historical information I read about him. He used to back up fiddlers at the fiddle contests around the state. He was a good guitar backup player. And of course, he played the fiddle too, obviously, but apparently he wasn't as good of a fiddler as such as he was a backup guitarist. So he gained some notoriety as a backup man. Some of this information I learned from a newspaper clipping that was up on a bulletin board in Rice's, what he called it, his fiddle room. When I would go to visit Rice, he had a little tiny house with doilies all over the tables and filled with antiques, and it always smelled like they hadn't had the windows opened in many months. It smelled like old people. He lived with a woman who was not his wife, but just some sort of a friend who apparently had agreed to come live with him and be his helper. And the whole place kind of stunk, but I didn't mind, actually. We'd go back to the fiddle room, and it was passably okay back there. You'd have fiddles all over tables and stuck away in shelves against the walls, and have a few fiddles hanging on the walls on these hooks, and it was always a blast to just sit down with old Rice. In the first several visits, as I learned more about sort of what he was about and learned more about his disability, it became clear to me that there was not ever going to be a lot of talking that would go on when I would go to visit him. So I would go and I would try to encourage some sort of interaction and ask him about fiddles or maybe play a tune for him, try to open up a dialogue somehow. I'd take a fiddle out, and I'd play him a tune. Or he would think of one of his fiddles, Mark, and he would talk just like this. Mark, let me play a fiddle piece on this one over here. And he'd reach over to the table, get the fiddle, and his hands would be shaking. He'd grab the violin bow. And of course that bow, because of his hand trembles, that bow would be sort of leaping up and down on the string, and things would be pretty scratchy. They were, in some sense, maybe a little bit awful to listen to if you didn't see sort of past it into a different place to sort of understand what was going on there. But I found it quite charming. And I found Rice to be just the most amazing presence. And so he would often play these weird and romantic pieces that just sounded like stuff he used to play from the pit orchestras during the silent movies. He would never play anything that sounded real contemporary, and certainly never played, that I can remember. I don't ever recall him playing like a standard fiddle tune. Although he might have played something resembling Soldier's Joy or Arkansas Traveler, but because of his disability, it didn't sound much like it, put it mildly. I would sit down with Rice sometimes, and something would happen to me. There was something that would happen to me in his presence. No, I'm not bullshitting here, folks. I would sit down, and everything would feel like it would come to almost a stop. Like time felt like it just suddenly slowed down almost to zero. And I could sit for a number of minutes with Rice and neither one of us would say anything to each other. I would just sit and he would just sit, and sometimes he'd have the fiddle propped up on his leg like this and the bow in his hand, and he'd just be staring off into space, and sometimes he would look over at me, but there was no pressure or compulsion to even say anything. We just kind of hung out in this space together, and it was all perfectly okay. I can remember a number of times sitting with Rice, and there was some kind of energy in the room that would just wash through my body. I was just bathed in bliss. Just bliss. A palpable physical sensation of bliss throughout my whole body. Just sitting with him. And sometimes he would start to move or do something, show me some tool that he had, or show me something on a violin that he had. And it was all done in extremely slow motion. And I would just watch, and waves of bliss would just wash over me. Now, I know I'm getting kind of out there, but I'm telling you the way it went down, man. This was for real. I can't explain it. But sitting with Rice was just astounding. Everything felt like it came to a stop. Like time literally changed somehow. I ended up actually buying 2 fiddles from him. I believe at that time they were probably the 2 best fiddles that he had. I made some kind of a deal with him on those fiddles. One had a French label. It was handwritten in ink in French script. Something about the shop of S.A. Dereux, Derous. Kind of a long-winded label written in ink on paper. I recall that it had bird's eye maple sides and back, standard maple neck, and it was definitely a French fiddle. Apparently made in the shop by someone under the tutelage of S.A. Dereux. The other fiddle was made by, I had a label saying Amedeo Simonazzi, an Italian maker who lived from about early 1900s until maybe 1960 something or 70 something. This Amedeo Simonazzi was dated 1946, as I recall. I didn't like the look of it, nor did I like the sound of it, but because it was seemingly Italian, that's why I took an interest in it, and I ended up acquiring it. And both of those violins left Columbia, Missouri with me, where, of course, we were all living, Columbia, Missouri. And I moved to Tucson, Arizona. And ultimately, I got myself landed in a bluegrass band that would go out on tours across the American West. And one of those early tours, actually, I don't even think it was a tour. I had found out about an old man who was a violin dealer in Encinitas, California. To make a long story short, I ended up going to visit this feller. in Encinitas, and he was quite an eccentric old man. Lived in a very dark, gloomy house. All the curtains would always be drawn, and the place was very mysterious, man. He was one weird son of a bit, but he had fiddles, all kinds of very fine violins at all kinds of high prices, laying all over the kitchen counter, over the dining room table, laying on the backs of couches. He had fiddles everywhere in the house, man. So I ended up trading him both of those fiddles that I had gotten from Alfred Rice for a Thomas Perry violin made in Dublin, Ireland, probably circa 1780. And I mean to tell you right now, brother, that fiddle had a fucking sound. That had some balls, man. It was a great violin. I never should have parted with it. But that fiddle became my main violin, my only violin for the next 4 solid years. I toured all over the West with that violin, from El Paso to Seattle, and everything in between. I recorded 3 different albums, three different LP albums with that violin. I won fiddle contests with that fiddle. I was in a terrible car accident with that fiddle where I almost ended up getting dumped into this Snake River along with the fiddle. It was only by a miracle that we were all saved, and that's a separate story unto itself. But I ended up finally selling that fiddle to a surgeon here in Tucson, Arizona, for a pretty good chunk of money, plus a really fine Parisian bow that he gave me. A bow by Otto Hoyer, and I think he gave me $2,500 in cash for the violin. The pair was probably worth a little more than that, but I was happy to make the deal. I had a wife and a little baby on my hands, and I really needed to raise some money, and I wasn't playing in the touring band anymore, so money was tight, and one thing leads to another, as you all well know. So that's just how it goes in life. But old man Rice, Alfred Rice, one of those days that I visited him, I asked him if he'd ever made a violin or made any violins, and he said, "Oh, yes, I made a violin a long time ago. Long time ago. I still have it." You still have a violin that you made a long time ago? Yeah, I think I made it back in like maybe the 1920s, when I was a pretty young man. I said, "Holy shit." I said, "Is there any chance I could get a look at it?" So he actually dug it out of a closet back there in the fiddle room. He proceeded to tell me that I immediately noticed that it wasn't made out of conventional woods. He proceeded to tell me that he had gotten a hold of a pretty solid black walnut coffee table that someone had tossed out. That was a thick enough chunk of wood to make the back and the sides and the neck for a fiddle out of. And he actually told me that he made the top from the heartwood of a railroad tie. It was just some kind of pine, like a thick-grained or wide-grained pine. And goddamn it, the fiddle didn't sound very good, but man, was it cool. It had a one-piece black walnut back. No, his woodworking skills were not all that great, but somehow I ended up making a deal with him on that violin, and he wouldn't have just given that violin away. He We had become pretty good buddies, and somehow I was able to get that violin. And no sooner do I say those very words, than I think I'm remembering how I actually acquired that violin. If I'm not mistaken, the more I think about it, I think this is actually how it went down. My girlfriend Sarah and I were getting ready to move from Columbia, Missouri, to Tucson, Arizona. We were leaving town for good. And I was sad because I knew I would likely never see Old Man Rice again, which of course turned out to be true. I would never see him again alive. And I had told Sarah about that violin that Rice had made, that black walnut fiddle. And we actually drove by. We had the van all packed up, and we were ready to hit the highway and leave town. And I wanted to say goodbye to Rice one last time, so we stopped by his house. And we didn't stay long, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And then we said our goodbyes, and it was quite sad. And we hit the road, and somewhere down the road, I don't remember exactly how it went down, but somehow Sarah brought to my attention that there's something extra that followed us away from Rice's house. And it was an old fiddle case, and when I had a chance to open it up, it was the old black walnut fiddle. And Sarah had somehow secretly purchased it from Rice for me. That's what happened. I'd kind of forgotten about all that until just now. Wow. Wowie zowie. Old Man Rice. In the year 2000, I visited Rice's grave. That's my Ernst Heinrich Roth violin with the pickup on it that I used to play in bands all through the 90s and 2000s. Year 2000, that's when I finally managed to get back to the Columbia Cemetery and visit Rice's grave. And there's an interesting little story about that too. I had been in town to visit the great bluegrass bass player Forrest Rose, which we did. I and my wife Becca at the time, we stayed at Forrest's house, and we had a hell of a party on a Saturday night, and it was great fun. Now Forrest is no longer with us, bless his soul. But on Sunday morning, we're fixing to leave Columbia and go back to St. Louis, where we all lived. And I wanted to go visit Rice's grave, so we went over there, kind of at the west end of the Broadway commercial district, downtown Columbia. The far west end of that district, there's a turnoff into the Columbia Cemetery. So we started driving down the road into the cemetery, and I was absolutely certain that the grave was going to be off to our left somewhere, amongst a whole shitload of stones out this way. So I was kind of at a stop, and there was a fork in the road, and I was just about ready to start turning left because I was certain it was over this way in my mind's eye. And suddenly Becca says, "No, it's going to be off this way somewhere. It's going to be over here, to the right." And I said, "You've never been to the cemetery before. What, did you see the stone over there?" "No, I didn't see anything." "No, I'm not messing with you. I just have a feeling it's going to be back this way somewhere. I'm certain of it." I said, "Oh, wow. Oh boy. All right. I'll humor you a little bit and we'll just drive off that way first. But I was certain that it was going to end up being off to the left. So we turned to right and we're going down the car path there. Very slowly, about 2 miles an hour, and just looking right and left, right and left, right and left, looking at all the gravestones. And we got a little ways over there, maybe 20, 30 yards down. Boom. There was Rice's stone just off the car path to the right, like 1 or 2 stones over. There it was. So my wife had been right. Her intuition had been correct, which is kind of an amazing thing all unto itself, actually. So as we can see from this, last time I had seen Rice was 1976. But here we are in year 2000. And Rice has got his death date on the stone finally of September 30th, 1980. So he died about 4 years after I moved away from Columbia. He died while I was out cavorting all over the American West in a touring bluegrass band called Summer Dog. Old Rice was born in 1892 and he lived to 1980, so he was 88 years old when he passed. His wife's name was Margaret. And she had passed at 63, so Rice, he had a woman that lived with him that was just a helper. She was kind of like a sister, only she wasn't. They just decided to live together to help each other in their increasing infirmity, as it were. And that was really a nice thing for old Rice to have someone in the house helping him out with everything, because he was really getting pretty brittle towards the last that I saw him. But I love that old guy. I loved him so much. Miss you, my brother. Perhaps we'll meet again. Up yonder. Away up yonder. Perhaps we'll meet again, old Rice. Namaste to y'all. I love you all from the bottom of my heart. And I'm not just saying that. I really do mean it. I have really nothing left to do on this earth. The only thing in my bucket list is to just be kind and to love everybody and to serve people in any way I can. So that's what I'm about, and that's what I'm doing. Good night.